Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of Digital Fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and today we have another video of new leaks for Modern Horizons 3. Pretty crazy. Things just keep leaking, and Wizards keeps thinking that they've got the plug, and then it ends up being another leak from somewhere else. Things are getting kinda crazy at this point, but all of the cards that are leaked today are commander-only cards, so keep that in mind, but there's still a lot of interesting stuff to go over and dive into. Before we check out the cards, make sure you like the video if you haven't already. It's those of you that are liking all of my videos that are helping the channel grow so fast, so thank you to you guys that do it. If you haven't done that yet, please hit that like button. It helps so much. Make sure this video gets out to so many more people. And if you're new here, subscribe so that you never miss a drop. We've got tons of spoiler content and tons of Thunder Junction deck techs coming down the line, so you don't want to miss any of that, trust me. But let's move on to the cards here. First up, we have Mutated Cultist. This is a 1/3 Eldrazi horror with Devoid, so it technically has no color, but it does cost 1 black and 2 to play. When you cast this spell, remove all counters from up to 1 target permanent or opponent. The next spell you cast this turn costs 1 less to cast for each counter removed this way. And it has Death Touch, which is pretty cool. So, nice little 1/3 colorless Death Touch. Protection from a color is not going to protect against this guy. You'll be able to trade pretty well in combat, which is pretty interesting. But really, it's that cost reduction of your next spell that can get kind of crazy. You can only target something that's a permanent or an opponent, but you can target permanents that aren't controlled by an opponent, right? So this seems really, really good with something like battles, invasions. Just remove all the counters, flip your battle into whatever, and get to reduce the cost of one of your spells by 4, 5, 6, however much mana based on how many counters you remove from the battle. That seems pretty crazy. There's probably some other pretty wild ways to use this, but I think that's probably the best one. But if you could think of any other ways in which this is just completely busted, definitely let me know in the comments, because it seems like a really cool ability. Next up, we have Sawhorn Nemesis. This is 1 red and 3 for a 2/4 dinosaur. It enters the battlefield, you choose a player. If a source would deal damage to the chosen player or a permanent they control, it deals double that damage instead. Pretty interesting as a commander card here, because you can be very political with it, right? You can choose which player is going to get double the damage, or, you know, the permanents that they control will get double the damage. What's interesting to note is it doesn't have to be damage that comes from you or your stuff. It can be everyone that's sitting at the table. All of their damage done to that player and their stuff is going to be doubled. So, really interesting card here that lets you just selectively alienate one of the players at the table and turn them into a huge target, which is kind of interesting. It's also a dinosaur, so, you know, dinosaur tribal decks, I'm sure, will love this guy. Next up, we have Selective Obliteration. This is a colorless sorcery, costs a total of 5 mana, but 2 of that colorless mana has to be a 𝑇𝑒𝑟𝑟_, so has to actually be colorless. The other 3 can be whatever you want. Each player chooses a color, then you exile each permanent unless it's colorless or it's only the color its controller chose. So, if you're in a monocolor deck, this is going to be completely fine, right? You could choose red if you're playing mono red and save all your red stuff. But again, since this is made for commander, most commander decks are built around being multicolor, and most commander decks are very careful about choosing their commander based on the colors that they want to play. So being able to lock them out of all but one color and all of their multicolor stuff seems kinda crazy. It's also just a sorcery, right? It's just, you just play it and the thing happens. It's almost like playing a sweeper like a Wrath of God, except it's very selective in what it hits. And everything's exiled, right? Which is very problematic, as we've seen with things like Farewell and Sunfall. But pretty interesting card here. Moving on, we have Spawnbed Protector. This is 7 mana for a 6/8 Eldrazi. At the beginning of your end step, you return up to 1 target Eldrazi creature from your graveyard to your hand, and then create 2 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature tokens that can sacrifice to add a colorless mana. So, pretty crazy here. It does return it to your hand and not to play, so it's not like over the top busted considering the fact that it costs 7 mana, but The fact that it also gives you these 2 little 1/1s that can chump block, that can sack to add mana, it really helps you get the mana ramp you need to play out the thing you're getting back to your hand. So in some ways, it might actually be better than if this card had brought it onto the battlefield, since most of the Eldrazi stuff has cast triggers, where when you cast it, it does things, and it's not really ETB triggers. So this helps you bring it back to your hand so that you can cast it, while also effectively ramping you mana each turn so that you can have the mana to cast the thing, which, like I said, in most cases I think is actually going to be better than just putting something from the graveyard directly onto the battlefield. But this guy seems perfect for just an Eldrazi tribal deck. Can you think of how you'd want to run it? Let me know in the comments. Next up we have Tempt with Mayhem. 2 red and 1 for an instant. It has Tempting Offer. You choose target instant or sorcery spell. Each opponent may copy that spell and may choose new targets for the copy they control. You copy that spell once, plus an additional time for each opponent who copied the spell this way. You may choose new targets for the copies you control. So this is kind of crazy. This can be an instant or sorcery you play, or it can be something that your opponent plays that you respond to. No matter what you're targeting, everyone at the table gets the opportunity to make a copy of it, and then the more people that actually make a copy of it, the more copies you're going to get for yourself as well, and it's just going to get absolutely insane. Now, obviously, this is going to be much better with cards that are benefiting players, because people are more likely to actually want to copy beneficial spells like that. Really, really interesting card. I'm not 100% sure where I would use it. There's definitely going to be cards that are better to use with this than others. There are going to be certain instants and sorceries that nobody's ever going to choose to copy ever, because they don't want you to get extra copies of it, and they're going to be scared enough to just, no matter what, not do it, and you're not going to get much of a return on your investment that way. But there's got to be some really, really interesting targets for this. So if you have any ideas, definitely let me know in the comments. Moving on, we've got Twins of Discord. 7 mana for an 8/6 Eldrazi. Whenever you attack, choose odd or even. Creatures with mana value of that quality can't block this turn, which is really interesting. Each other colorless creature you control has Bloodthirst 2. Bloodthirst. I don't remember what Bloodthirst is. If you guys know what Bloodthirst is, let me know in the comments. But even just an 8/6 for 7 that has this ability is kind of gnarly. Now, you don't have to actually attack with the Twins of Discord, right? It's just when the Twins of Discord is on the battlefield, whenever you attack, you get to do this thing. So the turn it comes down, you can swing with the rest of your board and still trigger it, still choose odd or even, and make it so that those creatures can't block. So you can set yourself up for a really interesting alpha strike, regardless of whether this guy's a part of the attack or not, which I think is really, really interesting. But I'm sure he's a lot better based on that Bloodthirst 2, and I just can't remember for the life of me what that does, so let me know. Moving on, Ulamogs Dreadshir. This is a 10/10 Eldrazi with Vigilance for a whopping 10 mana. It has Ward, sacrifice a permanent with mana value 1 or greater. And then you can tap it to create a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token. Wow, that's a lot. So this seems perfect for Commander. It just comes down as a huge expensive threat that's going to pump out 10/10s once a turn. If you have ways to untap a creature, it's going to get even better. The fact that it has Vigilance means it can swing in for 10 before making the Eldrazi. And then even if they say block your guy and then use a combat trick so that your Ulamogs Dreadshir is going to die in combat, you can, before it dies, just tap it to make another 10/10 at least. So some really cool ways to utilize this card. The Ward, sacrifice a permanent with mana value 1 or greater, is also kind of interesting. It means that you can't sacrifice tokens, you can't sacrifice anything that's cheap that just costs 1, right? You don't have to sacrifice something huge like an Eldrazi, but you do have to sacrifice something relevant, which I think is going to get people at Commander tables fighting over who actually has to finally use their removal spell to take this guy out. I sense a lot of bickering and a lot of players trying to convince other players to be the one to take this guy out, which is really kind of interesting. And I think that ward ability makes this really good for like the political angle that, you know, Commander games tend to dig into. Next up, we have Pyrogoyf. That's right, there are so many Goyf variants in this set. It's just absolutely absurd. So this is 1 red and 3 for a Lurgoyf. It has star power and 1+ star toughness, just like all of the Tarmogoyf variants. Pyrogoyf's power is equal to the number of card types among cards in all graveyards, and its toughness is equal to that number +1, so kind of like a Tarmogoyf in general. And when Pyrogoyf or another Lurgoyf creature enters the battlefield under your control, that creature deals damage equal to its power to any target. So what you're telling me is this is a Tarmogoyf that is also a Flametongue 𝐸𝑣𝑒. That's literally what it is. It's a Flametongue 𝐸𝑣𝑒 Tarmogoyf that acts almost like slivers in that it gives that ability to all the other Tarmogoyfs. I know there's at least a few more Goyf variants that we haven't gotten around to spoiling yet, and I'm curious if maybe the rest of them will start to stack up abilities like this that they give to other Goyfs. It's just really interesting. But even just by itself here, like a Tarmogoyf, that's a Flametongue 𝐸𝑣𝑒, that's going to turn all of your Goyfs into Flametongue 𝐸𝑣𝑒s, seems insanely powerful, even if it is a little bit more mana. So, yeah, this card is bananas. Next up, we have Bismuth Mindrender. This is 1 black and 3 for a 4/3 Eldrazi with Menace and Devoid. So it does not have a color, even though it's black in the mana cost. Whenever Bismuth Mindrender deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card, and you may cast that card by paying life equal to its to the spell's mana value rather than paying its mana cost. So not only do you get to play something off the top of their library, and you're guaranteed to not hit a land, but you don't have to pay the mana cost at all, you just have to pay life. So this guy's going to be a little bit trickier to use. The Menace helps him get through, but you are going to need some hefty life total in order to really use him multiple times and get the most advantage out of him. So probably meant to be used in some kind of a life gain deck or something like that. If you have another idea for him, definitely let me know in the comments, but super cool card. Next up, we have Aggressive Biomancy. This is 2 mana plus +X in the colors of Simic. It's a sorcery. You create X tokens that are copies of target creature you control, except they have, when this creature enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So you just get to make a whole bunch of token copies of whatever you want, and every single one of them is fighting another creature. This gets absolutely absurd when you take into account that there's so many Eldrazi in this set, so many absolutely giant creatures, because that X cost, it's not limited by the cost of the thing that you're targeting, right? It's not like it costs more to target something that's huge than targeting something that's small. You just have to have them on the battlefield first before you can cast a spell. So if you have a creature deck, like a deck that's ramping into a ton of huge Eldrazi's, then you can just make a bunch of copies of one of them with the same mana that you ramped with to play them, because now you have tons of mana that you ramped into them with to then use on the Biomancy, and that seems absurd. I don't know if it's a little bit win more, but in Commander, this has to be good, right? This has to be good. You just target your biggest dude, make a bunch of copies, make sure they fight and kill all of the most problematic cards on the board that you don't control. This card seems nuts. Next up, we have Bloodbraid Challenger. That's right, a new iteration of Bloodbraid Elf. This is a 4/3 elf berserker with Cascade and Haste for 1 green, 1 red, and 3. So in the colors of Gruul. It also has Escape for the same mana cost as its original mana cost, and then exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. So not only do you get to slam this down and Cascade and hit a 4-drop, you get to swing because of the haste, but then you get to escape it later. And what's crazy about escaping it later is, like, because of the Cascade, you'll get another Cascade. So being able to cascade the first time and then replaying it from the graveyard and cascading again, and both times having a 4-power creature with haste that's swinging in immediately, makes this card just insanely aggressive while also having the value we would expect from Cascades. So those two elements combined on the same card seems kind of bananas. I have no idea where this card will end up, but it will absolutely be played, right? It's gotta be. If you agree with me, let me know in the comments. If you disagree, let me know in the comments. I'd really love to know where this is gonna end up, but it's definitely gotta be played. It's gotta be. It's too powerful. Next up, we have Broodmate Tyrant. This is a 5/5 flying dragon for a whopping 7 mana in the colors of Jund. When Broodmate Tyrant enters the battlefield, you create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying, and then it also has Encore for a whopping 8 mana in the colors of Jund. And when you pay that Encore cost, what happens is you pay on the Encore cost when it's in your graveyard, and what you end up doing is making a copy of this creature for each opponent that you have, and each of those copies is attacking each one of those opponents. And then at end of turn, you have to sacrifice all of those copies. But what's cool about Broodmate Tyrant is Broodmate Tyrant makes a 5/5 flying dragon when it enters the battlefield. So what happens is, say you're up against 4 other players and you play the Encore cost, you're going to get 4 copies, and each of those 4 copies is going to give you another 5/5 flying dragon. And then they're going to be swinging in at a different player each, and then at end of turn, those 4 copies will be sacrificed, but those 4 5/5 flying dragons that were made from each of the copies are going to stick around. So you get lasting value on top of your swinging in with evasion, you know, from the graveyard, which is pretty powerful. I don't know if this might be a little bit too expensive to actually see play, but the card is super fun at least, and I'm very curious if anyone ends up slotting it in their decks. So really cool card. Next up, we have Eldrazi Confluence. This is an instant for a total of 4 colorless mana, but 2 of those mana have to be the colorless Hedron pips, Hedron, however it's pronounced. So it actually has to be colorless mana, and you choose 3 when you play it. And you may choose the same mode more than once, so you could choose just one of these modes three times if you want to. Target creature gets +3, -3 until end of turn. Exile target non-land permanent, and then return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control, and create a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token that can sacrifice to add a colorless mana. So this is kind of like a command for Eldrazi, but kind of better, right? You can cast it with colorless mana. You can choose the same mode more than once. You could give something +9, -9. You could exile 2 non-land permanents and have them come back into the battlefield if they have ETB abilities, and then use the +3, -3 to kill something. Or you could just make 3 dudes so that next turn you have access to like up to 8 mana, even if you've played no other ramp for the rest of the game, and then you just like play out some kind of big nasty bomb. I feel like there's so many ways this card can be used. It's the versatility of charm-like cards combined with the fact that you can choose modes more than once makes me really optimistic about this card seeing play and about how good it is. But I don't know. Let me know in the comments how good you think this actually is. Next up, we have Infested Thrax. This is a 4/4 lizard with flash for 5 mana in the colors of Golgari. When it enters the battlefield, until end of turn, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you create a number of 1/1 green Saproling creature tokens equal to that creature's power. This ability, this card in general, is super, super powerful, but it would have been a lot more powerful a few years ago. Right now, there's just so much exile removal around, especially even in sweepers, like Sunfall, Farewell, stuff like that, that it's a little harder to get this to be as crazy powerful as it once would have been. But being able to flash this in response to a sweeper, in response to a Wrath of God. And like, sure, you still have to sack all your creatures, but you get an absolute metric shit ton of 1/1 saprolings because you get a number of them equal to the power of each creature that ends up dying that turn. That just seems crazy. Just flash it in response to a Wrath of God. That's probably the best way to use this. I think that's how it's intended. You could also just flash it in the middle of combat, when you know a bunch of stuff's gonna die, so that you're left with a whole bunch more than your opponent. Just a really crazy good card that, again, is held back a little bit by how prevalent exile removal is these days, but still pretty busted. Next up, we have Eldritch Immunity. This is just 1 colorless mana. It is a Hedron, so you do have to actually pay colorless mana. You can't use colored mana at all. It's a Kindred instant Eldrazi, so it counts as an Eldrazi even though it's an instant. Target creature you control gains protection from each color until end of turn. And then it overloads for a total of 5 mana, one of which has to be a colorless Hedron. This is nuts. So for just 1 mana, if you've only got 1 mana up, or it's early in the game, or whatever, you can protect one of your dudes from removal. Make sure it sticks around, make sure it doesn't die, which is kind of the going rate for 1 mana and instant speed anyway. But the fact that you have this other mode later on that you can utilize, that if you're willing to pay 5 mana, if you have the 5 mana to pay, you can just protect your whole board from every color. That seems crazy, because not only are you protecting from removal or from sweepers that don't exile, but you're also able to make most of your stuff unblockable unless they have colorless creatures. And so you could Alpha Strike for the win as well. So a lot of versatility here, both in being able to play it as its small form or its big form, but also as far as being able to use it as protection or as a finisher to win the game. Especially in Commander, right? If you just load up your board, and then eventually play this, and everything becomes unblockable, sometimes you might be able to take out multiple players in just one whack. So this card seems super, super powerful. If it was just one mode or the other, I'd be a little wary of it, but the fact that it has both modes on the same card just makes it insanely versatile and really, really good. Next up, we have Exterminator Magmarch. This is a 5/3 artifact Phyrexian construct for 4 mana in the colors of Rakdos. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only a single non-land permanent an opponent controls, if another opponent controls 1 or more non-land permanents that spell could target, you choose one of those permanents, copy that spell, the copy targets the chosen permanent. And as if that wasn't enough, you also can just pay 2 mana to regenerate it. All of that on a 5/3 body for 4 seems insane. It turns essentially all of your targeted removal into removal that hits all of your opponent, right? Like, you're no longer working at a loss as far as card advantage, you know? Normally when you're in a multiplayer game of Commander and you have to use targeted removal, it's like, sure, you're taking out one thing of one opponent's, but all of your opponents are keeping all of their cards. So you're kind of at a card disadvantage to all the rest of the opponents. You know, you 1-for-1 with one guy, and everybody else keeps their cards. But this helps keep things balanced. Every time you use a removal spell, everybody's losing something. Nobody's able to stay ahead of you, so to speak. And then on top of that, I'm sure there's other really crazy, weird ways you can use this that aren't removal. It's going to be really good with things that steal stuff. If you could steal your opponent's permanent with an instant or sorcery, and then copy that and steal one from every player on the board, that seems kind of bananas as well. But there's got to be a super busted way to use this. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but if you have any ideas, let me know in a comment. I know I ask you guys to comment a lot, but like, I'm just super curious what you guys are thinking about these cards and what you'd want to do with them. I just want to dig in, man. There's just so much potential, and it just seems so crazy. But the last card of the day is Gluttonous Hellkite. This is a 3/3 dragon. This is a 3/3 dragon for 3 mana in the colors of Jund plus +X. So it is a bit expensive. It has flying, it has trample, And when you cast this spell, each player sacrifices X creatures. Gluttonous Hellkite enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it for each creature sacrificed this way. This is kind of insane. If you have enough mana, you can make everybody sack their board. It's not like you have to split up the sacrifices between the players, right? Every single player has to sacrifice the full X that you pay into this. So you could potentially make every player sacrifice their board, and then this guy gets insanely huge. Let's just say, for example, you have, I don't know, 9 mana, right? And X is 3 here. Everybody has to sacrifice 3 creatures. If you're sitting at a board with 4 other players, that's 12 creatures sacrificed. So this thing gets 24 +1/+1 counters, becomes a 27/27 flying trampler, and you forced every single player to sacrifice 3 creatures. That's bananas, and that isn't even like an insane amount of mana. That's not even like nearly impossible. That's usually going to happen in Commander, right? That you're going to get to that amount of mana eventually. Now, if you're in some kind of a ramp deck where you can just get to an insane amount of mana in a relatively decent amount of time, like, you can just make every player sack their whole board. Just their whole board. And then this guy's like a 100/100 flying trampler. That just seems crazy to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm too high on this card. Maybe it's not as good as I'm thinking. But I'm just thinking in a format like Commander, where the games are expected to go a little bit longer and it's more reasonable to play stuff that's a little bit more costly. Not to mention all of the support that we're getting for being able to play costly stuff, since this set has so many Eldrazi and stuff. It just seems reasonable. And as a card that's reasonable, it's just not going to just decimate one opponent, it's going to decimate every opponent, and that's what I think makes it kind of crazy. But I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you think it's as crazy as I do. I just think this card is absolutely nuts, but I do admit that I might be overestimating it a bit. I'm not sure. So let me know in the comments. But that's going to do it for today. Lots of crazy new cards. I'm sure we'll get more spoilers soon for both Commander and the normal base set of Modern Horizons 3. We've had tons of leaks already, so anything else that pops up, I'll make sure to cover it here. I'll make sure to get a video up ASAP. But for now, this is what we got. The set's looking kind of bananas. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's definitely a bananas thing. Like the video if you haven't already, so you can help this video get out to so many more people, help my channel grow. I would appreciate that so much. And subscribe if you're new, so you never miss an upload. Got tons of deck techs coming for Thunder Junction, so look forward to that. It's all on the horizon, pun intended. I'll see you then. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck techs, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.